After months of turbulence, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun has announced that he will be stepping down at the end of the year. Boeing's chairman Larry Kellner and the head of the commercial airplane unit Stan Deal are also leaving the company. In a stunning turn of events, Boeing, one of America's most iconic manufacturing giants, announced it would relocate a significant portion of its operations overseas shortly after Donald Trump assumed office as the newly elected president. The timing of the announcement struck a powerful chord in the national conversation, as it came just days after President Trump declared sweeping tariffs on key U.S. trade partners. A move that was immediately met with harsh retaliatory tariffs from several nations. The news ignited a wave of concern across the business and political landscapes, casting doubt on the potential effectiveness of Trump's economic strategy and raising alarm over the stability of America's global manufacturing leadership. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Boeing's departure symbolized a monumental shift in the dynamics of American industrial power. Known for its central role in U.S. aerospace and defense, Boeing had long been regarded as a symbol of American innovation and global prestige. Its aircraft were not only used by countless commercial airlines across the globe, but were also integral to U.S. military and space operations. The notion that such a powerhouse could be pushed to move its operations abroad sent shockwaves throughout the corporate world. It suggested that the new administration's protectionist policies might be backfiring rather than strengthening American industry. The root of the issue stemmed from President Trump's aggressive stance on trade. Seeking to fulfill campaign promises to revive American manufacturing, he instituted high tariffs on imported goods, targeting countries like China, Canada, Mexico, and members of the European Union. The aim was to discourage imports, encourage domestic production, and ultimately reduce the trade deficit. However, the move triggered a swift and fierce response from trade partners. These countries in turn imposed their own tariffs on American goods, effectively turning the global marketplace into a battleground of economic tit-forts. For Boeing, which relied heavily on global supply chains and international clients, the environment suddenly became unsustainable. Faced with increased costs on imported components and diminishing orders from foreign buyers deterred by retaliatory tariffs, Boeing found itself at a crossroads. The calculus was harsh and unrelenting. Components sourced from abroad now came with a significant markup, eroding profit margins. At the same time, foreign buyers began to shift to competitors, wary of the escalating prices and geopolitical uncertainty tied to doing business with an American company. Orders that once fueled production lines in states like Washington and South Carolina were now being diverted to companies based in countries unaffected by the tariff war. The competitive advantage Boeing once enjoyed was now under siege. The decision to relocate was not made lightly. Boeing executives had been vocal in their concerns regarding the administration's trade policies. In meetings with lawmakers and industry leaders, they warned of the consequences: job losses, diminished global competitiveness, and long-term damage to U.S. innovation. But as it became increasingly clear that the administration would not walk back its trade stance, Boeing began formulating a plan to restructure its operations in a way that would allow it to remain viable. This involved moving certain manufacturing and assembly operations to countries with favorable trade conditions and less volatile economic policies. The implications of Boeing's departure were immediate and far-reaching. Domestically, the move threatened thousands of high-paying jobs and left local economies bracing for impact. Communities built around Boeing facilities faced a grim future, with small businesses, service providers, and real estate markets all expected to feel the blow. For the workforce, many of whom had dedicated decades to the company, the announcement was nothing short of devastating. The security once offered by a career in American aerospace now appeared tenuous at best. Politically, the decision underscored the risks of unilateral trade policies in a deeply interconnected world. President Trump's efforts to realign global trade in America's favor had instead alienated allies and partners, creating an adversarial environment that complicated commerce rather than simplifying it. The retaliatory tariffs placed on American exports made products like Boeing's aircraft prohibitively expensive for foreign buyers who began exploring alternatives in Europe and Asia. The result was not a resurgence in American manufacturing, but rather a growing isolation that threatened the very foundation of industries that had once been the pride of the nation. Internationally, Boeing's move was seen as a warning sign for other multinational corporations. It signaled that even the largest and most influential companies were not immune to the consequences of protectionist policies. For many global firms operating in the United States, it raised uncomfortable questions about the future. Would they too face rising costs and dwindling demand? Would they be forced to reconsider their American operations in favor of more stable environments abroad? The precedent had been set, and the message was clear. Economic nationalism came with a price. The situation also had broader implications for America's standing in the global economy. Boeing's exit marked a symbolic retreat from a world order in which the United States had long been a dominant player. As production shifted overseas, it wasn't just jobs that were lost, it was influence. Manufacturing hubs in Asia and Europe began to expand, taking on roles that had once been uniquely American. In the boardrooms of emerging economies, the departure of Boeing was seen as an opportunity, a chance to capture market share and assert new leadership in the global aerospace industry. At the same time, Wall Street reacted with uncertainty. Markets hate unpredictability, and Boeing's move injected a heavy dose of it into the system. Investors began to question the viability of other companies similarly exposed to international markets. Industries from agriculture to automotive were already feeling the effects of the trade war, and now even the aerospace sector, a crown jewel of American exports, was buckling under the strain. The ripple effects were immediate. Stock prices of major exporters dipped and analysts began revising earnings forecasts downward across multiple sectors. Behind the scenes, lobbyists scrambled to contain the fallout. Business associations, trade groups, and policy think tanks worked feverishly to influence lawmakers, urging a reassessment of the administration's tariff strategy. The message they carried was urgent and unified. If policies were not recalibrated soon, more companies would follow Boeing's path, further eroding America's industrial base. Yet within the White House, there was little indication of change. President Trump remained adamant that the long-term benefits of his approach would outweigh the short-term pain. The divide between political rhetoric and economic reality was growing. Supporters of the administration clung to the belief that the tariffs were a necessary corrective, a bold move to rebalance global trade and assert American sovereignty. But for many workers and businesses, the consequences were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The tariffs were not creating jobs, they were jeopardizing them. Rather than bolstering American industry, they were forcing it to adapt in ways that undermined its roots. For Boeing, the road ahead was filled with challenges. Relocating operations involved complex logistical and regulatory hurdles. There were legal considerations, infrastructure demands, and the need to establish new supply chains in unfamiliar territories. Yet, despite these challenges, the company felt it had no choice. Survival in a global market meant operating within systems that facilitated rather than hindered growth. In its new home abroad, Boeing hoped to regain the flexibility and access that had been eroded by U.S. trade policy. While the move addressed some immediate financial concerns, it also brought new reputational risks. Boeing's identity was deeply tied to its status as an American company. Moving operations overseas could alienate patriotic customers, strain defense contracts, and complicate relationships with the U.S. government. Yet, the company calculated that these risks were preferable to continued losses and operational paralysis. It was a pragmatic decision born out of necessity rather than ideology. This pivotal moment also sparked a broader societal debate about the future of American capitalism. Was it still viable to pursue policies that prioritize domestic interests in a globalized economy? Could the United States afford to isolate itself economically without sacrificing its role as a leader in innovation and industry? The answers were not clear, but the questions were growing louder with each passing day. The Boeing incident became a rallying point for critics of the administration's approach. Economists, business leaders, and trade experts began pointing to the company's departure as a textbook example of policy gone awry. They argued that real economic strength comes from integration, not insulation. From cultivating partnerships, not provoking them. They warned that if the U.S. continued down the path of economic nationalism, it risked becoming a cautionary tale rather than a model to emulate. At the same time, some voices within the administration saw Boeing's move as an act of betrayal, evidence that corporations were unwilling to make sacrifices for national interests. They accused the company of abandoning American workers and undermining the president's vision. But such accusations rang hollow for those affected on the ground. For them, the issue was not loyalty, but viability. The economic conditions created by the tariffs made it nearly impossible for companies to operate without incurring substantial losses. Patriotism could not pay the bills or keep factories open. As Boeing began executing its relocation strategy, The consequences of the administration's trade policies came into sharper focus. They were pressured to explain why one of America's flagship corporations had departed under such controversial circumstances. This undercut diplomatic credibility in economic forums, and created a perception that the United States was turning inward in ways that alienated its traditional allies. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us what are your thoughts on Boeing leaving the US after Trump's tariff policies. We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you.